So, hello, welcome to Around the World webinar. I'm Ashish Awasti, the chair of Communication Working Group. And today, supposedly, we had a lot of registrations, close to 500 registrations. So making this one our biggest webinar yet. Thank you very much for that. And the topic today is, of course, ERC grants, but starting grants. And we have three speakers, Silvana Munsi, who is project officer at MCAA, but also a project manager of an ERC project, and of course, a researcher as well. And Juan Luis Paris, who is a Ramón y Cajal researcher at VIMA, Plataforma Bionant, and he is a ERC starting grant recipient in 2025. And another speaker is David Rivas Fernandez Rivas, who is a professor at University of Twente, and he received his ERC in starting grant in 2019. So we will hear from all of them about their experiences, and Silvana will tell us before what is ERC exactly and what type of funds and how recognized is it and why is it so relevant. So Silvana, please take the floor.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yes, I've been the project manager for 6 years of an ERC advanced project in the field of history of science. ERC was created in 2007, and it became not only the most prestigious program in Europe, but also a way to evaluate researcher and research institution internationally. So as you probably know, it's a bottom-up approach. So you can propose a proposal in any field of research. There are 3 different types of grant. There is the starting grant that is up to 7 years since the completion of the PhD. The consolidator that is between 7 and 12 years since completion of the PhD, and then there is the advanced grant. So you can have in the starting 1.5 million euros, in the consolidator up to 2 million, and in the advanced 2.5 million euros. Why it's so successful, this kind of program? Because it has 3 strengths that you can easily identify. One is the generous amount of money that it provides. The other one is that the PI directly reports to the European Commission. So actually there are no intermediate, and that's it's a way to ensure the independence and the complete freedom of the PI in using the funding. And the third strength is that, again, to protect somehow the PI, the funding is, the host institution receive also a generous part of the money. So that creates a very favorable environment for the PI to develop completely in independence the proposal. And my experience was great in this project. Not all the ERC projects are so successful, but the same, they are together with the Marie Curie action, the 2 programs that deliver the highest ratio of output per million euros of funding. So we are talking really about the most prestigious program in Europe. And I don't know if I already finished my 5 minutes, but it's focus, the aspect that is very important, that focuses on the PI. So you need to be really promising or really well-established scientist to win an ERC grant. And it's not about a team, a consortium like in other projects, but this is about the excellence of the API and the very good idea that you want to develop. All the sorry for the noisy, all the details you can find in the template and in the site, but I think that it's very important that you remember this aspect that I mentioned. That's my experience as a project manager, because I didn't have the grant, but I worked for 6 years because we had the COVID in the middle, so we had an extension, but usually it is 5 years for developing the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvana. Apparently, I just received an email from David that he's unable to join because we are at maximum capacity. So, well, thank you. Anyway, Silvana, now I will give you the floor, Juan, while I sort the issues with David. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation, first of all. I was just mentioning before we started that while I was preparing my ERC application, I attended like a million of this, some in person, some virtually, so it's nice to be at the other end of this, and I hope that my experience can help those of you who are thinking about applying. This will be, at least my presentation will be focused on the starting grant, because that's the one that I just got funded a few months ago. Can you see my presentation all right? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I will be focusing on the starting grant, although I think some of the pieces of advice that I will share are quite general. Also, my field is in the life sciences, so I have seen in the chat that many of you come from a very different fields. But also I think that some of these, or most of these ideas and key points are from across the board. So first of all, just a little recognition that there's this thing called survivorship bias, which, as it's shown in the cartoon here, is like if you ask people who have won the lottery to give talks about how to become rich, they will, of course, advise that you buy as many tickets as possible, because you're selecting for people who have been successful in that lottery or in that system. The ERC is a very competitive scheme, and when you get funded or you don't get funded, you don't know where you were placed. So whenever you hear an ERC grantee giving advice, something that I try to keep in mind and that I am bringing to you as well, is that you never know. I might have been the last one funded in my year, and maybe someone who was the first one not funded was basically the same quality. So we have to acknowledge that there's a certain amount of luck that is involved in this process, and you just have to live with it. That's also another reason why, if you're not successful, you shouldn't despair. You should try again, learn from the experience, and move on to bigger and better things. So a bit of a very brief mention of who I am, what I've done. So I did my PhD at Complutense University in Madrid. Did my PhD. I also went abroad a couple of times, which I think is quite standard for Spanish academia, but I know that it's not the case in other countries. So I spent a few months in 2016 in the US at Boston Children's Hospital, and then another few months in 2017 in England at the University of Oxford. Then I finished my PhD and I obtained an individual fellowship from a private foundation called the Ramon Areces Fellowship, which I took to Portugal, to the International Iberian Nanotechnology Laboratory. After that, I had a second postdoc also with an individual fellowship called the Sara Borrell in Malaga at IBIMA, my current institution. Again, in 2022, I spent most of the year as a visiting researcher in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, at Queen's University. And then I got my current position, which is another individual fellowship from Marie Curie, which in the Spanish system is the closest thing we have to a tenure track. And throughout my entire career, I have worked in the field of nanomedicine, so the application of nanotechnology for diagnostics or therapeutic development. And I am a pharmacist by training, but I did my PhD in a material science lab, so my background is quite broad. I've worked in many labs with different experience and different fields, which I think is also a good piece of advice if you want to. That's something that I bring up a bit later. I think something that a lot of ERC grantees have in common is that they have had experiences in different areas that they can bring together. And it's actually that specific combination of different expertise that makes it so that you are the best person for it, which is one of the main evaluation criteria. Also, I have only applied once. So all of this personal experience is based on an N of 1. So just keep that in mind. So my project is called the Cell Nano Remote Project, and it's based, or the goal is to achieve flexible remote control over therapeutic cell behavior using nanotechnology that can respond to different stimuli like ultrasound, light, or magnetic fields. So it brings together a lot of chemistry, some physics, a lot of biology, and yeah, so it's just a combination of all of my prior expertise, but with a little twist that I will also talk about. It was funded in the 2025 ERC Starting Grant Call, so the project has not started yet. It will actually begin in early 2026. And it was funded in panel LS9, which is biotechnology and biosystems engineering, and I will also mention a bit about that as well. So where to start when you are preparing an ERC starting grant application? My first piece of advice is for you to go to the ERC website and look for the guide for peer reviewers, because there you will see what they ask the reviewers about the application, the candidate, and so on. And in that way, you can tune your application to what will be asked to the reviewers about it. So the process is a two-step evaluation process. You submit everything at once. It's not like in other Horizon Europe calls where you submit a pre-proposal, they evaluate it, and then a selection of those submit a full proposal. It's not like this here. You submit all of the documents at once, but they will be evaluated in two steps. In step 1, they will evaluate what is now called part 1. It historically has been called part B1. Which is like an overview of the grant in 5 pages and your CV. And then a selection of those will move on to step 2, where they actually evaluate the whole proposal, including part 2, which is all of the implementation now. And also they will have access to part 1 and the CV. So in step 2, they evaluate everything, and there's an interview. And then in that interview, for which the panel members are all in Brussels, but the candidates connect remotely, they will ask many questions about it. And it's actually, I always thought that most of the decision was probably made before getting to the interview. That was not the feeling that I got during the interview. It was quite intense. And and even reading the evaluations from the reviewers and the panel members and so on, I have the feeling that it's a quite relevant part of the evaluation process. So just if you're invited for the interview, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, you really have to still make that extra effort to prepare for the interview appropriately. At both steps, there are 2 things that are evaluated: the research project and the principal investigator. So this is an example. The questions that they ask in this evaluation form, which is public, is in that guide for peer reviewers at both steps, from both the research project and the principal investigator. I will just highlight like the main things from the project. What are the important scientific questions? what is the advance in the frontier of knowledge, which is the main point that they want to get from the research project part. It has to be at the very frontier of knowledge. It has to push this boundary forward. From the principal investigator, they ask about your ability to conduct groundbreaking research. That is referring to your track record up to that point. Evidence of creative and original thinking. And then, does the PI have the required expertise and capacity to actually carry it out? I think this is the key point. Most people obsess over metrics and whether or not you have a paper in Nature or if you have a big grant as PI. I think this is the most important thing, is, are you really the person to carry this out? And then in step 2, from the project, they also evaluate the methodology and working arrangements. So is it feasible? And then the timescales and resources that you have asked for, if they are fully justified or not. From all of these things, my feeling and what I think is the consensus is that the research project, and it's not very explicit in the call, it didn't used to be that way, but now it's very explicit in the evaluation criteria, is that the research project is more important than the CV. So if your idea is amazing and you're the right person to do it, you don't need a huge CV. So this is just so that you don't self-select out of the call. Please, if you have a good idea and if you think you have the expertise to carry it out, submit an application. So by far, the idea is the most important component. So it's not as in other consortia calls where it's, you know, this mix of expertise. No. Here it's the idea. That's the most important thing. It has to be groundbreaking. It used to be this high risk, high reward thing, but it's not like they don't fund risky projects. I think most of them are risky, but now the evaluation has changed into explicitly wanting a groundbreaking thing that is not incremental. And the reaction that you want to get from people in your field when you tell them about your idea is, that would be so cool. And then they add, if it worked. And it's actually that if it worked that takes the most effort when preparing the application, because that would be so cool thing is what gets you to step 2. That's the main goal of the part 1 of your application. What used to be part B1 is to get the reviewers excited about the idea and wanting to know more about it, about how is this person saying that they're going to be doing this. And then the if it worked part, it's there managing that risk is what actually gets you funded. So your CV has to support these things. First, that you have done cool things in the past, because if you say, oh, I'm going to do this really cool thing, okay, but have you done similar things? Not similar things in conceptually the project, similar things in the scale of the things that you are proposing. Like, are you capable of doing research at that level? So that is your track record. You don't need papers in Nature and Science, but you need to have a competitive track record. And your background has to be the ideal one to carry that project. Because this is a PI-driven call. So it has to be your profile that is perfectly suited for the project. Just because you write the project to take full advantage of what you have done in the past. And of course, here having held grants as PI in the past also helps, because it gives the idea that you are actually capable of managing a research project with people and so on. So what makes the ideal ERC proposal? Well, I don't know. If I knew, I would get every proposal that I submit funded, which I assure you is not the case. But in my opinion, the ideal ERC study grant proposal, or ERC proposal in general, relies on a conceptual innovation rather than a technical innovation. It has to get people excited about the idea, what you plan on achieving, and that has to have a twist. But this is also nice, because that means that you don't need to be very technically challenging. Like, maybe with conventional tools, you can do something that is conceptually very impactful. And this conceptual twist is what makes the proposal cool and interesting. even if the methodology is really common, even if you're going to be doing ELISAs for 5 years, this is an exaggeration, of course, the idea is the key thing. And because it's PI-driven, it has to have this thing where they read the proposal and they read your CV, and it has to be obvious that that project comes from your mind, that it's you who is, that project is built around you, around the skills that you have, around the experience that you have, but with this change in the mindset. In my project, for example, most nanomedicine projects are, so we build this nanoparticle with this drug for this pathology, we inject it in this route of administration, and if this works, that's great. If not, this is what we will do, which is great, and it has led to a very successful field. My proposal turned it around a little bit. It's like, okay, let's use these nanoparticles not as the therapies, but as the switch that controls cell behavior. So if you're doing cell therapy, if you're implanting stem cells for regenerative medicine, or immune cells for immunotherapy, what if you could control in real time how those cells behave inside the patient's body? And how would you do that? Maintaining this flexible control, being able to trigger different responses using nanotechnology to modify these cells. I sent a very early draft of the part B1 of my proposal to a very big person in my field. And I think this is when I really realized that I think this idea is actually good for this. Because this person provided some feedback, which was very useful, but it was very clear that they had not read it in detail. So they made an assumption about what I was planning on doing based on the conventional things of the nanomedicine field. And then when I told them, no, that's not the thing, it told me, and their response was, oh, that's so cool. And that told me two things. One, the idea is really cool, and it's really out of what people are doing, because their mindset immediately went to this other thing that everyone is doing. And the second thing was, I really, really, really needed to emphasize what's different from the first page, because it had not got into the mind of this person who has browsed through the proposal. So about the timeline, it takes a long time. First, I would advise to get familiar with previous ERC grantees in your field, why those ideas were successful. Focus, while you're thinking about this idea, focus on building a CV that is competitive and that will support your claims, that you can do what you're saying you want to do. You don't need Science or Nature papers. I don't have one. But you have to have the appropriate expertise for the project. When you decide on what you think is an ERC-like idea, ensure you have time to mature the idea. I'm not talking about writing the proposal. I'm talking about having it in your head for likely months, so that you can work out the problems and the implications and then switch things and move around. So that's the most important part of the application. These months where you're not writing anything are what will get you the grant. And then apply. Do not wait until the last year of eligibility. It's a myth. No, most people don't get it in their last year. Or if most people get it in their last year, because most people apply in their last year. I applied in my last. Actually, I applied 1 year after, because I had a child, so I had an extension of a few months. But then you talk to a lot of people who got it in their third, fourth, fifth year. If you have a good idea, if you have a CV that supports it, apply. Don't wait. So this is the timeline of my career. I actually decided I wanted to apply to an ERC in 2019, like an idea, like I will eventually apply to this, and started thinking about ideas. And then I applied in 2024. Does this mean I was thinking about this idea for 5 years? No. But I focused on building a versatile CV. So for example, my PhD was in a material science lab, then I went to a physical chemistry lab, then to an immunology lab, then to a pharmaceutics lab. I'm trying to build as broad a skill set as possible, so that when I found an idea where my CV was the perfect one to do it, it would be super easy to justify that that's actually how you can do it, because it's your story that has brought you to that position. Then looking for the idea for this couple of years, in October 2023 is when I actually decided on an idea, and then I spent until May polishing those details and finalizing those why me details. So I actually added a Word package to take full advantage of my first postdoc experience and so on, generating some preliminary data. Then in June to August, finalizing writing. Again, writing is thinking. These are not two separate processes. While you sit down to start writing, then your ideas keep maturing, keep evolving, and that is part of the process. So don't postpone writing until the very end. Then I submitted, and in March, I was told that I got to the interview and preparing it until June, and I focused on generating some more preliminary data for the interview. That is important. I think preliminary data does help a lot if you can get it. So some specific advice. I know I'm super late in time. Do I have 3 minutes to try to finish this? Yeah, okay. So first, take it as an opportunity to decide what you want to do in the next 10 years. Think big, don't think with money or time constraints. And this is the key thing. Like, just if you had unlimited money and time, what would you like to do? Give yourself enough time to write. Whatever time you think you need, double it, because it's really, really an exhaustive process. Try to enjoy it and try to remind yourself why you became a researcher, because sometimes we are in these day-to-day activities, publications, grants. Why did you get into this? So take advantage of it. Choose your panel well. I actually submitted to LS7 and was switched to LS9, which in the end was the best thing for my application, but I was lucky. If I had stayed in LS7, I would probably not have been funded. And try to read as many funded proposals as possible. Ask grantees that are colleagues. Some countries do ERC reading days. Spain does it, for example, and that's quite useful. And try to get institutional support early on. Most institutions do provide this kind of support. Specific writing advice. This is the first page of my B1. Get to the point as early as possible. State the main goal of the proposal really early on. So the first sentence in my proposal was this question: what if we could remotely control living cells in the same way as we can change the channel on a television at the push of a button? So the idea is there in the first sentence. Include a conceptual figure, ideally in page 1, that summarizes it, because they read through a lot of proposals, so make it easy, and revise a lot. Your first goal is to make it to the interview, so try to include figures and graphics on every page, at least in part 1, balancing conceptual, methodological, and preliminary data figures, and cite all of the relevant literature. The evaluators are experts in your field. If there's a gap in the literature, they will notice. Try to make it easy to read, breaks, boxes, figures. Don't overdo it. Don't just make everything bold and underlined, but, you know. And this has to be a big emphasis on risk management in part 2. So that the proposal cannot fail completely. The concept will succeed even if some of the riskier parts of the proposal don't. On the CV, what I did is in each of the outputs, you have to list 10 outputs. I tried to say how that output linked to the proposal, what skills it demonstrates that will allow me to carry it out, and then the broader impact. And then if you get to the interview, congratulations. Get the timing exactly right, because they will just cut you off if you run over the time. Organize as many mock interviews as possible to get a list of questions, and try to get preliminary data to ask the questions that are repeated constantly over these mock interviews. In my experience in LS9, the interview was very intense. I replied to 21 questions in 18 minutes. They found every single weakness of the proposal, and it was completely science focused. There was no, like administrative questions. No, it was completely science focused, and every single weakness, it was found out during the interview. And they value very direct and concrete responses, if possible, even quantitative. I was asked, oh, so you mentioned characterizing this. What percentage of the particles would have to have this so that you would call it a success? So yeah, think about that. And just mentioning some changes in recent years, the proposal structure, it used to be, so CV and track record are now together since 2024, which I think is easier. Funding ID is now an annex on part B2. From B1, B2, now it's part 1, part 2. Part 2 is now shorter, 7 pages. I know there's no overlap, so that's better. It's easier. In my year, it was a mess because you repeated all of things in B2 that were already in B1. That no longer happens. So all of the feasibility is now in part 2. Eligibility from next year will be changed to 0 to 10 years post-PhD for starting grant instead of 2 to 7. So take that into account. And finally, just this last piece of advice. Our ERC proposal is very personal. So learn what advice you want to listen to and what you can disregard. In the end, you know your field and your proposal best. So thank you very much. And I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Juan. That was very nice. And people are appreciating it. You can see it. And I think you've summarized it quite well. Let's see what David has to say in this regard. I think you've covered everything, but let's see what David has to say.
Yes.
And David,
can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I think Juan already covered most of the important things, so it made my job a lot easier and shorter. But all right. So you wanted to introduce something about
Yes.
my role here
Yes.
today?
Yes, I already introduced David, but I will again introduce him since he's here. So David is a professor at University of Twente. He was a ERC recipient in 2019, quite long time ago before Juan. And he also owns a company. So maybe why don't you tell us about that also?
All right. Well, I'm sorry if you will hear some noise. I'm here waiting for my 2 kids. They are practicing judo, so that's why you see the background. What I thought about today is to share in a moment the slides I presented, and I think it comes very logically. I think if Juan and I would have planned how to present, we would have chosen this approach, because he showed you how to prepare for the submission and interview. And I want to share some of my slides, but after I tell you a couple of tips that I keep telling my colleagues when they come for advice. And most of it resonates with what Juan was just saying, that it has to be personal. And the first piece of advice that I say is, don't take the outcome of a personal grant personal. And sounds ridiculous or like a joke. And at least for the ERC, what I understand and what I have heard from people who have been in the panel, the chances that somebody is personally going to trash your story or your CV is close to 0. There are enough, how to say it, balances in check to make sure that the experts in the panel, but also the external reviewers, do a good job. Of course, sometimes you have more intense or more emotional reviewers or panelists making tough questions. But if you don't get a grant, doesn't mean that you are a bad scientist, doesn't mean that your idea is bad. It just means that at that particular call in that year, the match between what the panel wants to hear, what the reviewers write, and what you want to do don't align. And why this is important is that in my case, I applied in 2016. I thought it was a bit too early, but my dean told me, you should try, because we're going to get their reports as a way of external validation. And this is a good piece of advice. Sometimes the only way for you to figure out where you score in this type of excellence or rank list that people are obsessed with is just to try. And sometimes, the reviewer report in my case said a lot of cool things about the CV, which I didn't expect, and that the idea needed some maturation. So that already helped me defending in my faculty my first tenure track evaluation. So not even I was not even invited to that interview, but just the reviewers were so positive about my CV in just a couple of, years that then you can take that defeat as a weapon to advance your career. So that's the first piece of advice. And the second one is don't get too attached to one idea. So I was not invited to the interview that first round, but then 2 years later, I had a cooler idea. The funniest part is that I even kept the same acronym, but the idea changed completely in ways that I could not have even imagined when I submitted my first one. So probably, as Juan said, during the years that he had, his first thought about submitting, many cool ideas came to our heads, and that's also something that we in science and engineering have everyday great ideas, but writing them down is a lot more difficult, and then convincing or persuading other people is even more tricky. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you send your first draft to some of your closest colleagues and you see that it's still not at the level of excitement that everybody is agreeing with it, then keep trying, read also different literature, different fields where you might get inspiration. And so those are my first two advices before I share my slides as some sort of general way to explain what I meant with, trying to match your story to your CV. Let me see how to share here screen. I don't use Zoom that often, so I have here the green button. Screen. Yeah, probably. All right, can everybody see the slides? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And now, just on the fly, I realized that you might want to check afterwards something that I wrote a book. It's a small commercial. I didn't plan on it, but maybe later it would make sense. But let's go first to the slides. So every year, every panel has different rules. So whatever you see here might not help you in the end. So I know panels that don't like to see movies. Some panels ask you one slide. I've heard even panels asking no slide at all. So you have to do there a pitch. So you need to check every year what to do. So what I'm showing you here is my slides. And when I presented, I didn't show my face on the right side here. I just submitted a PDF, I think, with my face so that when the committee would be browsing, they would remember, hey, this is the crazy guy who was claiming to want to do that thing. And it was very static presentation. For me, that was a challenge because of my research has a lot of beautiful images and fast camera visualization. And at the beginning, I felt a bit down because, well, I'm not going to impress without my videos. But that actually forced me to really think carefully what is really the biggest story that I can tell. The only difference of what I presented back then is that I don't have now here, is that I first show one panel and then I show the second panel. So I would start, not repeating the title or repeated my name. When I went for the interview was in person. I think nowadays it's mostly online after the pandemics. So that's one of the things that I still think is nice when you can be invited. Sometimes you can read the room and you can get some sort of cues. And I like walking around. In my failed attempts to consolidators, because I tried and I haven't gotten yet a consolidator. When you are in the studio or at home, you sometimes cannot feel if the people are really excited or resonating with your ideas, but that should not stop you. You need to really work on your slides so that they stand alone, even if you are not presenting. The way I design these slides is trying to guide the reader, as you can see here. Let me put a pointer here. The title, there's some shorter version and a longer version. And then what is the context, drug delivery, and then the problem. And even though it sounds obvious to you, you need to engage the committee. And many people are familiar with needles. This was before the pandemic, so you can imagine how much attention this gained afterwards. But for example, here I show something that many people are not familiar, with diabetes care. So that needles need to be replaced regularly. And then right next to it, maybe also important to note that I apply for the P8 engineering panel. So that is what I say is the jungle, because you have people there trying to do microfluidics, wind turbines, logistics. So there you really need to really check who are in the committee and tell a story that resonates with all of them. So you see here a typical plot onto this line for printing. So inkjet printers that everybody uses need to work with inks that function in this printable space. And I made up a new space to the right. So this is a bit more like taking some risk, that I want to create a new injectable space. And here I took another risk in the storytelling, but this needs to come naturally to the way that you present. Some colleagues told me, you should not put images of Star Trek in your presentation, blah, blah, blah. But maybe only 10% of all the people that I show my grant, because also in both the part 1 and part 2, I had an image of Captain Kirk getting a needle-free injection with a hypospray. But most scientists tend to be nerds, and everybody resonates instantly. And when I show this slide, everybody starts smiling or, or elbowing the other colleague next to it. So you already can get a feeling that you are in a good path. So I think I only had 4 slides. So then I had to move quite fast. What is the main technology? And since I didn't have any movie, I had to patch together different frames from my movies and show a microfluidic experiment where I'm creating a bubble, and then with a bubble I create a liquid jet that travels at high velocities, injecting in a substrate. And you can see here already trying to indicate how I'm splitting the work packages and the amount of people, how to distribute, and it's part of the de-risking the story. This is super ambitious, and many people are familiar with the idea of needle-free injection. But then here on the right side, I'm trying to highlight what is really new. Diode lasers now are present everywhere, but back in 2018, they were just becoming less expensive. And microfluidics is more or less the core of my expertise. And I was already doing some minor steps in the direction of rheology. So I had visited MIT as a short sabbatical. So in my CV, it made sense that I was connected to experts in rheology, because until that moment, I had no experience with rheology. So I'm already indicating a combination of 3 factors that only me, with knowledge in microfluidics, a technological emerging development, could make all this dream possible. And then I move on to explain work package 1. We don't need to go into the details because I don't know the background of you all. But I took some of the images from the proposal and made it even simpler or more easy to stand out in presentation mode. Because imagine right now everybody's looking on the screen, but when I was presenting, the setup was a big screen and then a long table with a bunch of 50+ people who are not really going to see properly. So you need to make sure that your slides have a good contrast, because as people get older, or if they are colorblind, what is clear in your head is not clear on your slides. And then, as you can see here, I follow a template that repeats in the rest of the slides. Objective, innovation, and it's again a compressed version of what I put in part 1 mostly. And well, this is a 3rd work package, trying to demonstrate some preliminary work. In this case, it was unpublished back then. And in this is the most complicated work package, so I spent 1 full slide trying also to explain the engineering challenges, how to quantify all the different levels of energy and where the energy goes. And let me see. Yeah. And then in the last one, I tried to summarize my CV in half of the slide. So like why the ERC was the only step forward for me. So you see, I come from Cuba, and I had to show already, my international ability to work in different labs, and a different knowledge and experience that made me, the best candidate to execute this project. I hear some people have a full slide for all my CV, me and my team, and I'm so great. But I like to put it a bit towards the end so that it fits together. First, as Juan said, make people excited about the idea, and then what might be missing, then you already fill it up here. And as Ashish just mentioned, the valorization, I already had one spin-off company, and I'll tell you in a minute what happened after the ERC was granted. But then here I have a summarizing right side. I connect one element from the first slide about this injectable space, where we avoid the splashback, the breakup, which are limitations of the existing technology, create this new space made possible by the ERC. And I illustrated already my vision of where all this scientific research could be implemented. And well, injecting in 3D printed material to build a heart was already in the news back then. So that's also something that I would advise you. If there's something floating in the news or in the worldwide, and I hope you don't choose for AI, because right now everybody's using it. But if there's something that you can use of urgency, and back then, I think there was an Israeli scientist that had published the first 3D printed heart. I think it was not really working, but all over the news, they were showing this image of a heart. So that's why I drew this heart. And here, I also gave my vision on how this technology could become a product. And as Ashish was mentioning, after the ERC was granted, I have been lucky enough to get 3 proof of concepts, because with each ERC, you can apply to proof of concept. There's a maximum of 3. So I cannot apply for more, unfortunately. But once you get a proof of concept, also for you, once you are there, you can apply for EIC transition or EIC in European Innovation Council, which we did with my spin-off company. And we now got last year 2.5 million euro just for our spin-off company. Yeah. So the last thing I want to share, also to give space for Q&A, is my real secret sauce on how to write proposals and how to do my research. I took the effort to write a book. And you don't need to write the book. I can send you the details if you want. But when you're writing a grant, I think you need not only knowledge. So you guys have studied, you have finished your degrees, whatever. And typically, you're expected to match some knowledge with a practical challenge. The most difficult part in writing a proposal is persuasiveness, because you cannot manipulate. These are experts, as one are saying, and maybe you can fool 8 in the room, but there will be 2 that are going to pick it up and it's going to scratch your paint. So you need to keep thinking that you are teaching. I like to think of writing a proposal, it's like writing a book. You might not become the Dan Brown of writing proposals, but you just need to excite a selected group of people, and never forget about the empathy element. So like, why are we doing this technology? Even if you're doing fundamental science, it's your job as academician to make sure that you help the rest of society connect with the technological aspect, the societal challenges. And well, that is easier said than done. And if you guys want to know more, I'm happy to give you, a mini lecture. I'm asked sometimes to give lectures about this topic, because this is what I'm teaching in my undergraduate, like how to persuade. And now you see the 3 elements in my story of the ERC. Initially, I didn't know anything about lasers. I was persuaded by some colleague to host a PhD student in my lab. We got some preliminary results. I went out and asked people with diabetes, tattoo artists, and then I got a bit of funding to organize an event. I got a prize. With the prize, I went to US. Then I got an ERC starting grant that allowed me to hire more people and then gain more knowledge. And I have been repeating this virtuous cycle and spinning it out. You need to keep trying, because maybe you don't get it at the first round, but sooner or later, you might get it. And also get out. Once you show to the general public, you learn a lot about this. And just to close it up, so this book has a preface written by Bob Langer. It's one of the most famous engineers in the field. And it's available everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. But the universities can also request an inspection copy, I think, or an institutional version. And you see there's like superheroes. So it's a book that is meant not only for people interested in innovating themselves, but people who want to teach it. And well, I think I consume already most of my time, and other people are talking here in the background. So I will mute myself until you have questions for me. Thank you for listening, guys.
Thank you, David, very much. It was like a masterclass in how to ace the interviews. I do have a question. So Kwan mentioned that you don't need a Nature or any big publications for ERC starting grants. Did you have any big publications in your name when you applied?
No, and I think that is a very good piece of advice, because depending on the field, you only get a Nature paper depending on how strong your supervisor was, or how lucky you were. No? Working in engineering is very rare that you make it to this type of journals. What I think it makes sense is to figure out how to tell the stories. Sometimes having a patent application is as strong or stronger than having a Nature paper. I don't know if that answers your question. It should not stop you. It's a nice to have, but I know many people, even with a thinner CV, and they get it. It's about the quality of the idea, as Juan said.
Yeah, well, thank you. So now I have another question for both of you. I'll let David answer first. So in the interview, what sort of questions do the interviewers ask? And is there a way to answer them?
I think the best way, and it's the most difficult one, is to make it short, sweet, and without being arrogant, showing that you are in control. And something that you need training, even though I have been in many interviews, I haven't gotten them all, is to take a short break and think before shooting the answer.
Thank you, Juan.
Yeah, so I think when I've discussed the interview with other friends that have gone through the same, I think there are lots of differences between panels and the way different panels address the interview and how it's framed. I was in LS9, which is very methodology focused. So out of the 21 questions that I answered, 20 were methodological questions, like if this happens in work package, whatever, how would you reframe the proposal and so on? So very technical details. I got one question which was not technical, that is true, which was, as Silvana mentioned, there's a limit in the budget that you can ask for 1.5 million for starting, 2 for consolidator, 2.5 for advanced. You can ask for additional funding up to 1 million, now up to 2 million if you're coming from outside of Europe. If you need like large infrastructure access or buy big equipment, large equipment and so on. And I had that. I had 240,000 euros to purchase major equipment. And the one question that was not scientific was, why did you ask for this additional funding? Is this critical? But everything else is very technical. So my advice is do as many mock interviews as possible with as many people as possible from as broad a background as possible, so that you create this bank of questions that you can train yourself on how to answer them. It's not easy. For me, it was the most exhausting part was preparing for the interview.
Interesting.
I don't know if
yeah. If any one of you have any questions, feel free to turn on your mic and ask away if it has not already been answered in the chat. Just raise your hand and ask.
So I might throw another extra piece of advice. You won't be able to please everyone. You just need to try to cover as much as possible and anticipate. Sorry, I have one of the kids here is finished. No. So just try to imagine the most crazy type of questions. I also got one like, hey, fantastic. You can inject and vaccinate. But around that same period, one of the brothers of Kim Jong-il, I think the president or the leader of Korea, had somebody stab him in the neck with some poison, and he was dead. And they asked me, would your technology be able also to inject a poison like in this case? And it didn't really caught me off surprise because I had similar questions before, but try to connect to the ethical and the moral implications of whatever you are trying to bring might be so advanced and so controversial that you need to be prepared to give an honest answer. And what I did in that particular case was like any technology, a knife can be used to kill a person, but a surgeon can save a life. My commitment is developing the technology and making sure that it doesn't land in the hand of the wrong people, and something along those lines, but not trying to mitigate. So no, it would never happen, no, because we know technology can be misused.
Okay, so we received some questions. So someone asked that our collaborators in the proposal or project are important. So anyone?
You can answer. In my view, collaborators are something to manage with care for ERC proposals, because the danger is that it will be perceived as if it was not your project. It's fine to have collaborators on minor things, or how I framed it is this task completely necessary for the project? If it is, I would not give it to a collaborator. If it's something that could add to one of the work packages, that could make it more impactful, or mainly, for example, most of my collaborators are for contingency plans. So if my main idea, this proposed research doesn't work, then I have this collaborator that can do this alternative approach. And I did not receive any negative feedback on that, but I do know that for other people, if you rely too much on collaborators, it's tricky. There are synergy grants for multi-PI ERC proposals, but this, I think, it's not that you cannot have collaborators. You can, but they have to be very well justified, and your project should not rely on that collaboration completely, I think. I don't know if you agree with my view.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. I have mixed impressions from people. If you have 6 collaborators, then everybody knows that you probably at this stage might have 2, 3, 4 close collaborators. My approach is, if it's needed, for example, needle-free injection, there are not so many people in my case doing it actively scientifically. But if you say, I have visited this lab where they have this unique equipment, and it might be even too expensive to buy, with ERC, with the extra funding that you ask, then it makes sense. And you might even not have direct collaboration with that specific scientist. Then you need to be careful not dropping names. So typically it's good to check with whoever you put, hey, I'm going to mention, but also make very clear what is the role or the interest in this person to assist you. Because just to put a Nobel Prize winner as, oh, I'm going to collaborate with this guy, might not, resonate well with some other people.
If I can add one thing on that note, especially for starting grantees, I think you have to be particularly careful with adding big names, because there's always the risk that you will be seen as the little assistant of the big person. I think that's something also to take into account, that it's a PI-driven proposal, so it should be about the person proposing it.
And in line with that, something that depending on the field may make big differences. If there's a chance that you can ask the people you are working with to let you be the last PI, the last author, depending on the field, sometimes seniority or originality is seen as being the last author. Be strategic, even if you're finishing your PhD now or postdoc in the first 1-2 years, if you openly say to your mentor, supervisor, hey, I'm aiming for this competitive grant, I understand that my CV would be judged on originality, and a way to see that, as most people know, is being corresponding. In my case, I got all the professors working with me kind of told me that, go ahead, like put me where you want, but then be open, and I think you will get a lot more support.
So there's a question for you, Silvana. I know you answered it in the chat, but maybe more people would like to know it. So what advice would you give to researchers who are applying for ERC grant in humanities specifically, or social sciences?
Everything said so far is true. All the pieces of advice. What I can say is you can feel that you are not using, extra new methodologies or making a large use of technology. That's not the important point. The main point is still the idea. In the Ratter project where I work, we were using archival search. So, going in a library and looking for manuscript from the 15th, 16th century. So that's not the point. As Juan and David said, it's really the idea, and to show that you are the right, if not the only person that can do the job.
Thank you. And another one is for all of you, how important is the relationship with the host institution? Can you just go to a brand new institute and apply for ERC with them, or do you have to be in an institute and apply with that institute?
I might say that in my case, it was relatively easy because I had done my PhD and my postdoc. So in the institute with the clean room facilities, there was like no better place to do it. At least I wrote it that way. In the other end, I have a colleague that he was trying, after he got the ERC starting grant, trying to move it to another country. So even if you are free to take the money and move it around, not all universities might be happy depending on their financial situation, because in some countries, they might need to offer you a full position or permanent position. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have a thorough check before you start writing, or as you start writing, if in the institution you don't really fit in the long term, or they cannot give you a permanent contract, because postdocs is the worst position you can be in academia right now. It's so precarious. So having an ERC in hand can open many doors. But I don't know what Juan or Silvana would like to add to that.
So I think from the evaluation part, I didn't receive any comments about the host institution. I don't think it's not an evaluation criterion. I don't think they evaluate it per se. They, of course, will judge if you're saying, oh, I want to do this biotechnology project and I want to do it with the host institution is a supermarket. Well, of course, it's not feasible. Your host institution has to have the facilities and the resources to carry out the project. But other than that, I don't think that is that important. But I do think it's important to choose an institution where you see yourself long-term, even though there's portability and you can take it elsewhere. And I can assure you that chances do show up to move to other places when you are funded. It's better to plan those things beforehand. And yeah, some institutions are more open to supporting external applicants than others. That is also true. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you get funded, that same institution who didn't agree to host you at the application process would not accept you after you were funded. That also, things change very quickly after you get an ERC funded, for better or worse. But yeah.
And thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry. As I wrote in the chat, what I suggest you is to contact the pre-award office in the host institution, because they can really helpful, and they can put you in contact with the previous awardee. They can give you some, if the PI agree, they can give you the proposal, the winning proposal. And my last piece of advice is to apply, because as it was for me in the Marie Curie action when I applied, even if you are not successful in the application, all the thinking, all the writing will teach you a lot, and for sure will make of you a better scientist, a better person, and with more possibility for the future.
No, I fully agree to that. And I want to also add that what you show to your colleagues and people who you send your drafts will also indicate how good or how your process of thinking works out. So they know that it's super competitive. So even if you don't get it, they will remember, oh, this person had such a great idea. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 years later, you know, they might be assessing you for promotion in your faculty or reviewing a paper. Even the panels or the experts reading your proposal, one day you will find them and they will remember. There was actually one reviewer that a few years later, he said, I still remember your figures reading the proposal. So don't think that it's you against the panels. It's you letting more people know about your work and the quality of your ideas.
Thank you so much. Those are all valuable advice. But unfortunately, we ran out of time. So first of all, I would like to thank all the attendees and our speakers, most of all, Silvana, Juan, and David. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules and give us such amazing presentations. Thank you very much. And with that, I close the webinar.
And thanks to you, Ashish, also for arranging it all so professionally.
No worries.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
All right. Have a nice weekend.